Welcome to On Democracy with FP Wellman. I am, of course, Fred Wellman, your host. We are coming to you from the beating heart of America in St. Louis, Missouri. Actually, the freezing heart of America in Missouri right now. This is, of course, our holiday show. I hope everyone's celebrating Happy Hanukkah, and of course, Christmas is the weekend. I always bring the Christmas cheer. We're going to talk about fascism. Anyway, it's what you do at welcome. That's okay. We got a great guest. We got a great show. I'm thrilled to have her on. I've been trying to get her on forever. She's been traveling the world as always. So let's not waste any time. Let's get on with the show. All right. Welcome. As usual, I mentioned earlier, I am Fred Wellman, your host. You can't get rid of me. It's my show and I'm paying for it. So here we are. It's good to be back with you on the holiday week. I just got back from visiting my kids and grandkids in Richmond, Virginia, and snuck in before the snowstorm hits this week. And so if I'm slightly jet lagged, I apologize. I got in at like 1 a.m, but that's that time of year, folks. I hope you're having safe travels. Man, I really am excited about this show. So much going on. I was in D.C. yesterday. Got the opportunity to meet the great Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn for the first time in person. We've talked for ages via text and otherwise, and so it really made me think. And I got to tell you, every time I go to the Capitol in the last 2 years, I always kind of marvel at what happened there. Okay, on January 6th, coming up on 2 years, and of course with all the things going on with the end of the committee and everything else, I just thought it was a great time. I've been trying to get our guest on the show for a while. She's incredibly busy. She's been in Italy and everything else, but we have a great guest, and that's Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who is a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. She is an MSNBC Opinion Columnist and commentator on CNN and other media outlets about authoritarianism, fascism, threats to democracy around the world. Her latest book, featured right here in our stack of books, of course, Strongmen from Mussolini to the Present, examines how illiberal leaders use corruption, violence, propaganda, and machismo to stay in power and how resisting them has unfolded over a century. I love the book. She also publishes a terrific Substack newsletter and community called Lucid about democracy and autocracy, and I'm proud to be a paying subscriber, too. I'm a paying subscriber. She not only writes her regular newsletter, but hosts, of course, hosts chats about the issues of the day. I mean, you got to sign up for this one. It's worth it. Ruth, man, welcome to the show. So glad to have you. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy this time of year, too.
Yeah, I'm delighted to speak with you.
Well, I always start the show. Now, you and I, of course, we actually talked last year. You were so kind to come on. I was running a chapter online community, so we actually talked previously. But I want to get you in the show so the whole world could see our conversation because you're so smart. I was actually nervous getting ready, Ruth, because you're like, I was joking earlier that you're like the smartest person I've had on. No offense to anyone who's been on before, but Ruth is smarter than you. But, it's so good to connect. Now, one of the things I like to ask my guests, we start off every show, is like, how'd you get here? How'd you get in this moment? I mean, you've been in the academic world for many years. You grew up in California. What led you to studying fascism and authoritarian? How'd a girl from California end up studying Mussolini? I'm just curious where the journey brought you today.
It's not the most logical thing, but actually being in California is what did it, because there's no family connection to fascism. My dad's from the Middle East, my mom's from Scotland, so nobody was in Europe when fascism was going on. But as it turned out, when I'm in high school, I discovered that my town, Pacific Palisades and surrounding towns, Santa Monica, the beautiful beach towns, Malibu, these were areas where a lot of refugees from Nazism settled, like famous ones, like Thomas Mann, the writer, or the Arnold Schoenberg, the composer. And Arnold Schoenberg's son was a teacher at my high school. And so I started talking to him. I just started thinking about, what does it mean that this awful regime comes in and these people have to flee, halfway around the world and start over again, basically. And then I continued to study it in college, and I decided to do Italy because a professor told me, well, there's not as much done on Italy and it lasted twice as long.
Right.
So I thought there was more space to explore, to do, something original. But that's how I got started, was thinking about these exiles. And so it's interesting because in my book, Strongmen, I have this sub-theme of exiles.
Right.
And I think also there's a little bit where my parents were not exiles, but they they were first generation, and they were getting used to American culture, and most of their friends were not American. They were from all over the world, but like not American. And so there was that experience of growing up in America, but having a global outlook, let's say.
That is just fat. What a great, I'm so glad I asked that question. And, every time I ask that question, it ends up being something, unexpected. And you guys go on TV and everybody knows you from TV, but we don't actually know you, I think, is the challenge of that format. So I love it. What a great journey. And of course, you've become a leading expert in the country on this topic. I mean, it's required. Now, you were just in Italy, right, for the 100th anniversary of Mussolini's coup, right? So, I mean, that comes as a new far right government's taken over in Italy. It's calling themselves, right? Was the post fascism? They're calling themselves. I mean,
they're not post. They're like neo-fascist,
at all, right? Neo-fascist. I mean, what did you come away from that moment? You were there for quite a while. As you came away and back, seeing this country, it sort of gone full circle in 100 years. I mean, what does that leave you with a feeling after studying this for so many years, a couple of decades? It must be an unusual feeling to see it go.
It's like a weird karmic thing that 100 years exactly after the March on Rome, which again brought Mussolini, and it's very important because Mussolini was a prime minister in a democracy for 3 years. So we always think of Hitler.
Right.
There's very good reasons we think of Hitler, but Mussolini, there's like more lessons because he, during these 3 years, he like wrecked democracy and then he declared a dictatorship. But it's like a bad karma thing that, 100 years after this neo-fascist government comes into power. And also very interesting that the head of this first, neo-fascist government is a woman,
right?
Who's actually, she grew up as Giorgia Meloni. She grew up as a hardcore, like militant. She was the head of the youth wing of the party, of the official neo-fascist party. And right. As you know, the youth, they're always like real hardcore.
Right.
And so now she, says, I'm a conservative, and she's small and petite and blonde, and she uses soft focus like Carrie Lake. She has these videos now with twinkling lights and soft focus. But we should not be fooled. She's not a post-fascist. She's not conservative. She is a neo-fascist, and she's really kind of a demagogue in the Mussolini way. It's really scary. So I'm following that closely.
It's like a pink washing, right? They talk about it a lot. I was, a PR guy, and every year we have the for example, the breast cancer awareness month, and the football players wear pink, and the accusation is that we're pink washing, issues to make. It's a way of making something, the football of all places, the NFL, be pro woman, right? It almost feels like we're pink washing authoritarianism in some ways, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. There's this term, and it's not my term, gender washing by these female political scientists. And it started with people like Marine Le Pen. Yeah. She's the better known one, right? And she's, very prominent, and her father started this extremist party. And so these are very patriarchal, very sexist environments. And so it's interesting that, Le Pen was able to rise up because she, had her father introduce her.
Right.
But she dresses in a very tailored way. She's impeccable looking. And these women, and you can also count the president of Hungary, Katalin Novak, they talk about like they're right, that they're for women and they're for, women's power, but they're actually taking women's rights away, like the rolling back reproductive rights. And so these political scientists talk about gender washing, where it's easy to fall just because they're women. You think they're going to be on the side of women, but it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, much so. No, on that topic, just continuing that thread, I mean, you actually recently, one of your recent Lucid newsletters talked at great length about, defining fascism in this age, right? It is, you laid out a modern definition of fascism that was absolutely, for me, I found fascinating and kind of disturbing, right? It feels like a lot of leaders from Putin, Orban to Trump are dancing with fascism, but trying to play clever word games to avoid the label, right? So I think you make a clear case why it's bullshit that they are, I mean, what are the signs? I think what are the signs you see of a modern fascism, and why is it important that we recognize it as so, in your opinion?
Because, and I'm very careful about using the F word.
Right.
And I was one of the people who didn't want to use it for Trump. Right. And people would, a lot of people, progressives, would get mad at me for not using the F word. And part of it was actually strategic, because I felt like, when we think of fascism, we think of Hitler and maybe Mussolini.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way today. You have, outside of communism, you have fewer one-party states. You have today people keep elections going. And even, in Putin's Russia, where, it's by now it's like a dictatorship. And I agree with Tim Snyder, he is a fascist.
Right.
So I'll use the F word for him. I'll use the F word for Tucker Carlson. He's a fascist demagogue.
Yep.
But it can be misleading, because if you start saying, well, we're in fascism now under Trump, then people will be like, well, you're speaking out. There are multiple parties. There's a free media environment. So then it's like, what is fascism going to mean? So the whole purpose of my book was to look at what changes and what stays the same. And I do think that, the GOP, for example, it's definitely an autocratic party, and it's acting in its methods as well as its content. It's acting more and more like a fascist party. But if we're going to use that word, we have to realize it's going to mean something slightly different today.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a shutdown of all opposition parties. That's just not how it works today in most places.
Right. Right. It's fast. And of course, there's the violence, right? I think that's how you ended your newsletter, was you talk about that there's, the thing is, the key is also, if you overlook it, you're overlooking the potential for violence and the violence. And one of the things I've been saying quite a bit, right. I did actually have Dr. William Horn on the first season of the show when I was on Call-In, and because he wrote an essay called "Let's Use the F Word." Right? And so when you said it, I was like, oh, I talked about this once before. But I mean, there's that underlying violence to it, right? Which is, and I've highlighted a lot. If you remember, we did the Beer Hall Project, my pack that I started last year, is the violence inherent, but the violence isn't necessarily government violence. It's encouragement of street violence. It's the black shirts, right? It's the squadistas. It's the brown shirts in Germany, fighting the socialist, right? And in the Bolsheviks in the streets. There is a violent inherent in that system, and we do see that, right? We saw that January 6th.
Oh, totally. Well, and the other reason that Italian fascism needs to be better known is that it started as a decentralized militia movement,
right,
in the countryside, right? Mussolini was based in the country in Milan, but it started as these squads that went around and took control in the countryside.
Right.
And they were, killing and beating up, not just like leftists, but also progressive priests.
Wow.
So the militia aspect is really important. And, so of course I've written a lot about the extremists today, because when Trump started appealing, he didn't just like cultivate these extremists, of all sorts. And of course, his rallies, like January 6th, also, these were radicalizing places where everybody got together, right? But he and other GOP people were using Proud Boys and Oath Keepers as private security at rallies for years, since 2016. Right. So they had a whole relationship with these people. And one of the most disturbing things going on now, if you want to, like, from my point of view, studying authoritarian parties, if you want to see what a party is, track a party becoming more authoritarian, you got to look at who's getting kicked out of it and who is coming in. And the people coming in are like extremists, like Mark Fincham. He didn't win his election, but it's a big deal that he's an oath keeper, and he was the candidate for Secretary of State in Arizona. And there are many other oath keepers running for office. There are Proud Boys on the Republican Executive Committee in Miami. These people are becoming the politicians. And that reminds me totally of early fascism.
Wow. Yeah, it's right on target. And that's how I've seen it too. And we ignore those lessons at our peril. And, again, we talk about January 6th quite a bit. And you talked about January 6th in your newsletter today, and the motion it brings up every now 2 years later. I was on the Hill just yesterday, because I mentioned I was able to catch up with Harry Dunn. And I was struck by a line in your newsletter today, as a former Army officer and who worked at the Pentagon, by the way. I worked at that level. I was on the Army staff. My last job in the Army, I was on the Army staff. And you said something key. You said, quote, "During a coup, some must act and others must stand down so the operation can proceed, right? And a year ago, a number of generals, I'm actually involved in an exercise which I'll be able to tell everybody about probably after January 6th, but several retired generals, Paul Eaton and others, wrote an op-ed saying that we're worried about a second insurrection and we're worried about the military involvement. Yeah, you were part of that,
I was
right?
really interested in that.
Yeah, and they recommend, and so, me as a soldier, a former soldier, I mean, do you think the institutions like the Pentagon, those are seeing the danger as we see more and more of these folks? I mean, my God, there was an active duty major, a United States Army, United States Marine Corps major from Quantico broke in and held the door open and is being charged for the insurrection. So I guess as you thought about that today, as you wrote, I mean, I guess we're not out of danger, right? I mean, there still is those, in many ways, they're continuing their march and we're just sort of sleeping to it, right?
Yeah, because the part that it's enormously important that there are these criminal referrals, hugely important. But the part, and the committee couldn't do everything, right?
Right.
But the part that we don't know enough about, and I go on intuition. I knew the second it happened because, again, the third of my book is about coups,
right?
And that was the part I knew less about, and so I really did a huge amount of research, and I have coups all over the world in the book. So there are certain principles about coups. And one of them, you just said, some people have to act and other people have to stand down and not do anything. So it's dereliction of duty. So you don't pass on the warnings. You make sure the reinforcements don't, arrive. Or if it's a military coup, you make sure, when you've done this ahead of time through liaisons, you make sure that other types of armed people like police, if they're not on your side, they're going to be in a position where they can't act against you. You got, that kind of thing. Acting to make sure others don't act and do their duty.
Right.
So when, and this is America, we have so many, it's the biggest military in the world, so many armed forces of every type. And those Capitol Police were left on their own with just a few other metropolitan police. I knew this was highly fishy. So all this to say, what we don't know about yet, because the cover-up has been very deep, is the people in all of the institutions. So the Secret Service, we know they deleted their texts. We don't have the full picture of the scope of collaboration in institutions, because any coup, you have to have a broad buy-in from elites all over the place, both in government. And then we also don't know, we know that the Publix heiress, that supermarket heiress, she funded buses, but we don't know the full story of the GOP politician ties and funders. So as long as we don't know those things, and they've been very successful, that's why they won't testify, they refuse subpoenas, we can't adequately protect our institutions. I'm assuming, I don't have access to intelligence, I'm assuming there are lots of people who know way more than me, and I hope that they are acting, because that's what you've got to do. That's what the study of coups tells you. You've got to make sure that those people are dealt with professional sanctions in order that it doesn't happen again.
Well, the brilliance of it is, like you said, the inaction. Like, how do I prosecute someone for not doing something? I mean, and obviously everyone, right?
Yeah.
The unsaid thing, of course, is John. We talk about Charlie Flynn. By everybody I talk to, Charlie Flynn's a decent guy, 3-star general. Everybody I talk to, everybody knows him, said he's a regular guy. But there's no way to get around the fact that his brother was a key planner of the events and remains so. And he was at the Pentagon on one of key meetings, and he walked away and they weren't sent. And I got a personal experience with this, Ruth. My son-in-law is in
it's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. My son was a Virginia National Guardsman. He's been in the middle of all this shit. And he was actually in Charlottesville. He was one of the military policemen that had to guard the Lee statue. He saw all the violence unfold. Longest. I say it. This is a young man who deployed to Iraq during the war in 2011. But his day in Charlottesville was the longest day of my life as a father and a soldier. He deployed for the inauguration of Trump, and they were armed and they were ready for violence because remember the ladies with pink hats were coming. But they didn't deploy to January 6th when we knew there was violence coming. That it just, again, it's the lack of action, right? And that's what keeps me up at night. I mean, how do you prosecute someone because they simply didn't do something? That's the question of the day.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, you'd have to have. You know how they're trying to sanction. They're recommending, the committee recommended that the House Ethics Committee take over the cases of the people who didn't respond to subpoenas.
Right.
So that's a way. The only way would be a kind of professional ethics sanction, but that's not going to do it when you're talking about extremists.
Right. And in the military.
The thing about, and Michael Flynn, I've called him in PBS documentary one of the most dangerous people in America right now, because not only he was there and he's probably still getting his military pension, et cetera. He's embarked on this tour, this Reawaken America tour, which is a radicalizing tour. He's trying to indoctrinate people, also like using psychological warfare and telling them, like trying to get them to use psychological warfare on others, and indoctrinating them into being an army of insurrectionists. So it's pretty open what he's doing. Reawaken is not, he's a Christian nationalist, but this isn't about spirituality. This is about having an army of God that is armed. So he's a huge problem, and I don't really know who is stopping him, or who can stop him, and how. He's a private citizen right now.
And I constantly get asked that. I literally had a DM just last night on Twitter. Somebody said, Fred, I don't understand how he hasn't been recalled to active duty in court-martial. And you have to explain that typically it's only for crimes that were committed. They typically only recall somebody if there was a crime that was committed in service. Like, for example, there's actually a general, there's a general who was found out had abused a young girl, I think his own daughter actually, and was recalled for that and stripped of his rank and thrown in jail. But it's very difficult. And I know and that's our problem. Our institutions are so scared of the norms and traditions being broken, indicting a president, recalling a general for activities on retired status. But we're going to I've been saying it for 2 years. People are sick of hearing it from me, but we're going to norm and tradition ourselves into history,
Yeah, because we're not in normal times. That's why I keep doing everything I'm doing, is to let people know that these are not normal times. We are, I think, as soon as Trump said he wouldn't accept the results of the election, we started a kind of state of exception.
Right.
And you can interpret that broadly. And that allowed all kinds of, things to start happening. And the GOP and the Flynns and all these people, they saw the possibilities of being lawless. And that's what Trump bequeathed to the nation. Everybody saw that you could be rewarded for being lawless.
Right.
So if we continue using norms and customs that were made for times when both parties believed in democracy, that's not living in reality. And it's been hard also with media too. It's been hard to shift the culture away from the idea that we should take both parties at good faith.
Yeah, I had sold Donna O'Brien on the show just 2 weeks ago for that very purpose. That as an
exactly, she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's great because we recognize the institutions are not up to this moment. You mentioned in the book. And so here's the book. By the way, I highly recommend the book. And you wrote that in early 2020. Right. And you have Trump's in there and it's somewhat surreal reading the new book now, seeing how things went. I actually have a note in my script where I say, how often, now we're 2 years on, I imagine you want to screen the TV on a daily basis. I told you so. I mean, you saw it coming. You said that he would not take the scars of being a loser. It goes against his psyche, right? It's exactly what you're just talking about, right? You did kind of call it, right? That there would be some fight. So with that said, he remains on the national stage. Is there where are we not seeing the flags, or is there a danger again? I mean, and how does that play out, you think, in the next few months?
Yeah, it's a super interesting moment because, as you know, many GOP, it's not that he's an extremist, it's that he's not winning elections for them.
Right.
And so they're not so interested in him anymore. He's got too much baggage suddenly. It's very important. It's not because he's a criminal in a million ways. It's because he's not performing. His people are not performing. So they want an extremist who can win elections. And that they think is Ron DeSantis, who is equally extreme, but is too smart to say things like, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone. He's
Right.
not, DeSantis isn't going to say that. So I don't know what will happen, but Trump still has he has a base that's very strong still. Marjorie Taylor Greene is still, she's a real opportunist, so who knows what will happen, but she's still saying that he's her candidate. And above all, this is the scary part, is he's got millions of devoted armed followers who would gladly, do January 6th all over again for him.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And the other thing is, the more he feels forsaken and humiliated and cast off, the more he's going to just want to destroy everything. And not just the party, people keep writing about that, but also incite violence to just bring everything into chaos. I truly believe that, because he has the same personality as other people who've done those things in the past. When they think they're really going down and this would be definitive for him, it's very unpredictable what he would do.
Yeah. And I just had a really chilling thought. I mean, he's been fairly careful in his doublespeak and is very careful in not being, keeping himself from being implicated in things. Right. But you're right. The chilling thought is, what if he doesn't care anymore? What if he simply says, it's time that somebody took over that building? I mean, if he truly did, if he dropped the pretense, I mean, it's sort of terrifying that if his doublespeak was able to accomplish January 6th, imagine if he went straight at it.
Well, think about, if you were not getting into that mood, why would you choose now to invite Nazis to dinner? And be proud of it and refuse to apologize for it? What's going to happen is he's going to be associating with the most extreme elements of society, because that's all he has left.
Yeah.
Because the more establishment, they're all extremists at this point. So when I say establishment, they're all fascists, but they are gravitating toward the smoother, the guy with the suit and tie, and not the guy who's inciting violence.
Yeah.
So what does he have left? He has Nick Fuentes left, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who just 2 weeks ago gave a speech in public saying, if I'd organized January 6th, it would have worked because we would have had more arms there.
Yep.
So these people are totally unrepentant. They do it again tomorrow, and they do it better.
Yeah.
So it would work.
And in what role do you see, I mean, because she talked about Steve Bannon there. I mean, we haven't talked about Bannon. I mean, I see Bannon as sort of one of the most rotten, the rotten core of a lot of this is Steve Bannon. I think he gets a pass a lot. We talk about Flynn, and she said if Steve Bannon and I had planned this, we would have won. I mean, what role do you see Bannon in all this? I mean, there's a microscopic chance you might see a jail cell, but I'm not holding my breath at this point. I just don't see it. What role do you see Bannon?
I wish.
I know. What role do you see Bannon?
Go to jail.
And the danger of a Bannon, right? He's sort of the muse in some ways.
Yeah, he's been the mastermind of the strategy at the very beginning. I mean, when he truly, he's a real fascist. And one definition of fascism Mussolini gave, and I talk about it in that article, is it's a revolution of reaction, where you blow everything up to actually turn back the clock in some ways and take away rights from people who have gotten, too many rights. So that's why you come in and you shake everything up, and then you protect tradition, to protect white male Christian tradition. Right. So Bannon, through his time in the early Trump administration, he's a formidable propagandist. He's actually, he advises Bolsonaro. Yes. He's all over the world. He tried
to set up his little fascist academy in Italy, right? At one point that got stopped.
Yes, he thinks big. And he's one of these nodes of America. There are many now of the GOP with these international networks. So but let's just keep to our country. He's at it with his podcast, radicalizing people every day. And the fact that these people are just around and they're not in jail is I don't know what to say about that. It's just awful.
Well, it circles back to that institutional failure, right? That the fear of crossing a line, of some sort of imaginary line. I mean, it's hard not to be a conspiracy theorist when, it keeps playing out and, playing. But which brings me to, I'll probably let you go because I know you got a hard stop. But so back to my trip to DC. I had a meeting with a number of people, some great meetings. But what I really felt was interesting was one of her comments was that her feeling in the city is that with the midterms behind us, there's sort of a vibe, especially among the Democrats, that we, quote, survived the threat, that with this election and holding the Senate and in many ways, not being as going as bad as it could, that this talking about the danger to our democracy and preserving democracy, or groups that are dedicated, like or voices like ours that are dedicated to protecting the democracy and the republic, are somewhat passé now, right? And I disagree, but with a month under us since the midterms, are you getting that same vibe, or do you think maybe have people fallen asleep at the wheel here? I mean, it sort of feels like they're ignoring the red lights and flag. I mean, it's like Chernobyl, right? Like, what are these red lights? Don't worry about it. It's just red lights. I mean, are we in more danger now than we were 2 years ago? I guess is the big question as we approach January 6th again.
Yeah, you know what? Well, people are exhausted, and we did have a lot of amazing victories in the midterms, like just 93 Muslims were elected. So many historic firsts, and people want to have a moment to feel good. But the problem is it's like this incremental change that is not good for democracy, in that when Congress starts up again, 1/3 of the House is going to be election deniers. 1/3 because of the midterms.
Yep.
So we all know, and it's very important, that the Finchams and, some of the worst offenders, Mastriano, they didn't win. Very important that Fetterman won. His whole campaign is like a model for the future. They need more candidates like that. Fine. But how are you going to govern with 1/3 of the House extremists? Because being an election denier is not just about accepting propaganda, a belief that Trump won the election. It's corruption. It's refusing to. It's something you do. You're refusing to accept defeat.
Right.
You're refusing to accept democracy. That's why Dean Obadiah calls them democracy deniers, which I really like that term.
Right.
So if you've got 1/3 of the House as democracy deniers, how are you going to govern? Right. I don't know.
And they have power because of the thin margin. They're going to have an outsized voice.
Yeah.
Luckily, we held the Senate. Otherwise, it'd be a complete train wreck. And I talked about Michael Steele last week. I call them the wallpaper Republicans, right? Or the late for lunch crowd, right? Who don't answer questions. There's so many who are. And I guess that's my last point, though. I said, we talk a lot about the extremists. Like you said, there's 1/3 are deniers. But sometimes I feel like the real danger is the 2/3 are just letting it go, right? Like I said, I call them the wallpaper Republicans. These are the ones who their dream in life is to disappear into the fucking walls, right? And not be seen. And they're letting it occur. They're disappearing in the background. I joke about, you see the press conferences, they're the ones that run by the microphone. Sorry, late for lunch. It's the passive. We talked about earlier in the conversation about the ones who simply the part of the coup where they just don't act, right? How do we reach them? I mean, is there in your perspective as historian of these things, those are really the keys, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, it's the ones who sit by and let it happen, right?
Yeah, it is them, or the people like in today's newsletter, I mentioned Josh Hawley.
Yes,
who
my senator, right here in Missouri. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
well,
so his 3-act drama. We all know the first 2 acts. He fist pumped, he incited, and then he had to run for his life. So we all laughed at him being a meme.
Yep.
But the 3rd act, what did he do? He quickly adopted the party line. He got quiet. He's still out there, but he's still trying to be respectable, as though January 6th was a nothing burger.
Right.
Or also that required him to just not talk about the threat to himself. And Pence is doing the same thing. It's absolutely, it's unbelievable to me that Pence, not really, because there are other authoritarian examples of people who are threatened by the leader and don't speak out. But those things happen in regimes like Mobutu's Congo, in the Congo Mobutu.
Right.
That's the other examples I have for people who act like Pence. So you're right. How do we reach those people who are normalizing this, even though they're not talking about denying elections, because they're equally complicit because they're in the party and they're supporting everything.
Right. They're complicit. And again, their whole goal is to disappear, to run re-election and not go. We have, I highlight Ann Wagner here in Missouri quite a bit. She just keeps a low profile. She gets reelected because she's got a solid red district, but she's sitting there against the wall. She disappears in the wallpaper every chance she gets. But there's much, in my opinion, in many ways, more of a danger to the country because they simply won't stand up to the extremists for their own pursuit of power.
Yeah, and the conformists are the ones who've let authoritarianism stay in power. I mean, this way, in Italy, they were there for 20 years. It's insane.
Right.
So because of people like that. So you're absolutely right to highlight that. We should all do that more often.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to. Well, this has been great. I can't thank you enough for your time, and I'm always impressed and overwhelmed, and I feel like I'm struggling to keep up with you. But thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, Ruth. I hope you have a wonderful holiday.
You're ahead of the curve. I did want to say one thing because you have your beer hall project.
Yeah.
Next spring is the anniversary, and I was invited to a conference in Germany by the National Socialist Museum, which is it's an anti-Nazi, obviously, in Munich.
Right.
And I'm going to go.
Wow.
Because it seems, just as it was very important to be in Italy for the 100th anniversary of that, I'm going to speak at this conference on the 100th anniversary of the Beer Hall Putsch. So I will be, we'll talk about that in the spring.
Sounds like an excuse to have you back on in the spring. I love it. That's fascinating.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 100 years. Time flies. It was 98 when I started. Yeah, Jesus, that's terrifying. And again, the history lessons are there for us. I think people want to, again, the one thing in the theme I have with that project is that that was not the end. That was the beginning. And
yes,
it was the
absolutely.
beginning. And they learned a lot of lessons. Well, thank you so much. Hope you have a wonderful holidays. Thank you for your time. And,
you too.
And thanks for everything you do. I mean, what you do.
Okay, you too.
All right. Have a great day. Well, that was a great conversation with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She's amazing. If you don't have her book, you must get the book Strong Men. You can find her online. She's Ruth Ben-Ghiat on Twitter and everywhere else as well. As you can see, I'm a bit of a super fan. I get goofy. Some of these guests, I just can't believe they're coming on my show to talk to me. And she's one of my favorite people, just a brilliant intellectual. As always, you can always find me at FP Wellman on Twitter, or my official Instagram, of course, is FP Wellman Official. We really hope you love the show, and you'll go to YouTube and smash that subscribe button and like it and share your thoughts and your comments. I do read them all, even the ones that call me names. It's great. I love it. The fashion criticism, I get it all. I love it all. It's all good. I'll take it all. I don't mind. It's just great to have the engagement and talk to you guys. As always, we're sponsored by our friends at Vi Media, vi.media. They are a terrific digital marketing agency based right here in the greater St. Louis area. Our partner for you when you want to generate growth in hundreds of different industries. They've been growing beautifully this year. We're very proud of their partnership. It can serve all of your digital marketing needs, and I hope you'll give them a call. Again, it's vi.media on the web, and you can reach out to them, vie.media. I love you being part of the show. We're still going through the holidays because I'm a glutton for punishment. There's so much important things going on. Next week's guest is Jason Kander, who's a remarkable leader and has become a friend of mine here in Missouri. Jason had run for office. Remarkably, he took a pause from running when he recognized his challenge with his own mental health and PTSD like me. He's very involved in the program. I'm very proud to be a part of the Veteran Community Project here in St. Louis and Kansas City. And we'll have a chat next week in our mid-holiday show, and I hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, as I mentioned, share the show, share the clips, and be a part of our community. I'm very proud of you. I hope you have the most wonderful holidays with Hanukkah and Christmas is approaching. Enjoy them with your families and stay safe out there. Thanks for joining the show.